The doctor slipped me a secret note. Right there, in the sterile quiet of the examining room, as I was gathering my coat and purse, his hand brushed against mine, leaving behind a small, tightly folded piece of paper. It read simply starkly, "Don't go home. Run." That night, huddled alone in a generic hotel room miles away, the cryptic warning echoing in my ears, I discovered the horrifying truth. My own family, the son I had adopted and raised as my own, the daughter-in-law I had welcomed with open arms, the granddaughter I adored, was actively planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, committed to a nursing home against my will, all to steal everything I possessed. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly fathom, was that I, their supposedly frail and fading matriarch, held a secret of my own. A secret meticulously kept for over a decade, a secret that would ultimately change their lives, and mine, forever. My name is Grace Thompson. I am 72 years old. For 45 years, I believed, with the fierce, unwavering conviction only a mother can possess, that I had raised a loving, devoted son. Daniel came into my life and the life of my late husband, Arthur, when he was just a small, bewildered 2-year-old boy, abandoned at a local church, adrift in the world. We adopted him without hesitation, pouring all the love we couldn't channel into biological children into this precious, unexpected gift. With all the boundless love in my heart, I gave him everything I possibly could: a stable home, a quality education, unwavering affection, and countless years of quiet, unacknowledged sacrifice. When Arthur passed away suddenly from a heart attack 10 long years ago, Daniel, already grown with a family of his own, became my sole remaining anchor. My only immediate family, along with his sharp, ambitious wife, Sophia, and my bright, beautiful granddaughter, Chloe. They became the center of my shrinking world. But that Tuesday, during what should have been a perfectly routine, utterly unremarkable doctor's appointment, the carefully constructed facade of my quiet, predictable life completely fell apart. Dr. Alistair Finch, my trusted family physician for over 20 years, the man who had treated Daniel's childhood asthma and held my hand through Arthur's final illness, examined me as he always did, checking my vitals, listening to my heart and lungs, asking the usual questions about my sleep and appetite. But something about his behavior seemed jarringly off, subtly but unmistakably wrong. His hands, usually so steady and reassuring, trembled slightly as he wrapped the cuff around my arm to check my blood pressure. He avoided making direct eye contact, his gaze constantly flickering towards the door or the medical charts on his desk. "Everything looks remarkably good, Mrs. Thompson," he announced finally, his voice sounding strained, artificially cheerful. "Your lab results are perfect. Blood pressure is excellent. Your heart sounds strong as an ox. Honestly," he forced a small, unconvincing smile, "you have many, many good years ahead of you." His words should have been comforting, reassuring. Instead, they sent a prickle of unease down my spine. Why did his prognosis feel less like a medical assessment and more like a coded warning? As I slid off the examining table, gathering my coat and purse to leave, I felt him approach quietly from behind. Suddenly, unexpectedly, while my attention was focused on retrieving my keys from the bottom of my bag, Dr. Finch discreetly, almost invisibly, slipped a small, tightly folded piece of paper into the open top of my purse. He did it so quickly, so smoothly, his movements practiced, almost furtive, that I almost didn't notice the brief, cool brush of his fingers against mine. "You take good care now, Mrs. Thompson," he murmured, stepping back quickly, his smile tight, forced, his eyes finally meeting mine for a fleeting, intense second, filled with an expression I couldn't decipher. Concern, pity, fear, and remember, he added, his voice barely above a whisper, family isn't always what it seems." His cryptic words, coupled with the clandestine delivery of the note, sent a genuine chill, cold and sharp, racing down my spine. What on earth did he mean by that? Family isn't always what it seems. Whose family? Mine? And why had he felt the need to give me that note so secretly, so urgently? I mumbled a confused thank you and hurried out of the office, my heart pounding a sudden, erratic rhythm against my ribs. I clutched my purse tightly, the small, folded piece of paper inside feeling unnaturally heavy, radiating a sense of impending dread. I resisted the overwhelming urge to read it immediately, right there in the busy waiting room. Something told me this message, whatever it contained, was not meant for public consumption. During the slow, rattling cab ride back to my quiet suburban home, 1,000 anxious thoughts chased each other through my mind. Dr. Finch had never, in all the years I'd known him, acted so strangely, so unprofessionally. He was a serious, meticulous, almost rigidly proper man, known for his calm bedside manner and unwavering professionalism. He had known my family for decades, had treated Daniel for childhood ear infections, had signed Arthur's death certificate with quiet compassion. Why would he risk his reputation, his practice, by passing me secret, ominous messages now? What could possibly warrant such extraordinary, alarming behavior? When I arrived back at the familiar brick house, the house Arthur and I had painstakingly saved for, lovingly decorated and filled with 45 years of shared memories, I found Daniel, Sophia, and Chloe gathered in the living room. They were talking in hushed, conspiratorial tones when I entered, but they abruptly fell silent the moment they saw me, their faces snapping into expressions of overly bright, slightly forced solicitude. Sophia, standing near the fireplace, had a sheaf of official-looking papers clutched in her hand, which she quickly, almost guiltily, hid behind her back as I walked into the room. "Mom, you're back!" Daniel exclaimed, jumping up from the sofa with exaggerated enthusiasm. "How was your doctor's appointment? Everything okay?" His smile, usually so warm and genuine, didn't quite reach his eyes. There was a subtle tension around his mouth, a flicker of something guarded in his gaze. "Everything's perfectly fine, dear," I replied, trying my best to sound normal, casual, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside me. "Dr. Finch said, 'I'm in perfect health for my age, fit as a fiddle,' he said." Sophia exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance with Daniel, a look that didn't go unnoticed by me. Why did they seem almost disappointed? Disconcerted? Were they actually hoping the doctor would tell me I was sick, frail, declining? "Oh, that's wonderful, Grandma," Chloe piped up then, her voice sounding strangely cold, lacking its usual youthful warmth. She was perched on the arm of the sofa, scrolling intently through her phone. "That's just great. It means you have plenty of time left to, enjoy yourself." Her words trailed off awkwardly, unconvincingly. The forced cheerfulness, the veiled disappointment, the awkwardness, it all coalesced, confirming the vague sense of unease that had been growing within me for weeks, ever since the stroke. Something was definitely wrong. Something felt fundamentally off within the dynamics of my own family, within the walls of my own home, and Dr. Finch's cryptic warning, his secret note, suddenly felt less like a strange anomaly and more like a vital, terrifying piece of a puzzle I was only beginning to comprehend. That night, the oppressive tension in the house was palpable. Dinner was a strained, almost silent affair. Daniel barely spoke 2 words to me, focusing instead on cutting his food into meticulous, unnecessarily small pieces. Sophia answered my attempts at conversation in clipped monosyllables, her attention seemingly fixed on a loose thread on the tablecloth. Even Chloe, usually so bubbly and eager to share details about her college classes, remained unusually quiet, avoiding my gaze, communicating primarily through texts on her phone hidden beneath the table edge. The air felt thick, heavy, charged with unspoken resentments, hidden agendas. You could cut the tension with a butter knife. Is something wrong?" I finally asked, unable to bear the suffocating silence any longer, needing to puncture the uncomfortable bubble. "Everyone seems so quiet tonight." "No, Mom, everything's perfectly fine," Daniel replied instantly, far too quickly, his gaze still fixed firmly on his plate. "We're just tired. Long day." Sophia murmured agreement, pointedly, not looking up. After the strained meal, I retreated to my bedroom with a heavy, anxious heart, something was most definitely going on, and Dr. Finch's note, still unread, resting ominously at the bottom of my purse, suddenly felt like the key, the terrifying, potentially devastating key, to understanding it all. With trembling hands, I retrieved the small, folded piece of paper. I sat on the edge of my bed, the familiar floral pattern of the quilt blurring slightly before my eyes, and carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably Dr. Finch's, neat, precise, slightly cramped. What I read took my breath away, stealing the very air from my lungs. "Mrs. Thompson, your family, Daniel and Sophia, were here yesterday. Sophia inquired extensively about your mental state, asking if recent tests showed any cognitive decline, if I could potentially certify that you require specialized, supervised care. They explicitly mentioned wanting to transition you to a nursing home for your safety. They also asked detailed questions about your inheritance, your assets, and the legal requirements for managing the finances of someone deemed incapacitated. I assured them you are perfectly competent, but their insistence was alarming. Please be cautious. Don't go home immediately if you can avoid it. Seek legal counsel. Run. Alistair Finch." My hands began to shake uncontrollably, the paper rattling against my trembling fingers. My own family. The son I had raised from infancy with so much love, patience, and unwavering devotion. The daughter-in-law I had welcomed into my home, treated like my own child, showering her with affection and support. My granddaughter, Chloe, the light of my later years, the repository of all my hopes for the future. Conspiring, behind my back, plotting to have me declared incompetent, planning to ship me off to a nursing home, scheming to get their hands on my money, my house, my life savings. Suddenly, sickeningly, it all made horrifying sense. The strange, overly solicitous visits, the veiled questions about my memory, my finances, the attempts to isolate me, control my environment, manage my affairs, the hidden papers Sophia had clutched earlier, their palpable disappointment when Dr. Finch declared me healthy. They weren't concerned for my well-being. They were frustrated because their trusted family doctor hadn't cooperated with their nefarious plans to have me medically certified as mentally unfit. I couldn't sleep that night, not a wink. Every familiar creak of the old house settling, every distant siren wail, every rustle of leaves outside my window startled me, sending fresh waves of fear and adrenaline coursing through my veins. I lay awake for hours, rigid in my bed, listening intently, straining to understand how I could have possibly reached this terrible point. How was it conceivable that the very family for whom I had sacrificed everything, my career, my youthful ambitions, my financial independence, my entire adult life, was now actively, coldly conspiring against me, viewing me not as a mother or grandmother, but as an obstacle, a burden, a problem to be eliminated? Around 2 o'clock in the morning, paranoia mixing with a desperate need for confirmation, I heard low, muffled voices drifting up from the kitchen downstairs. Fear warred with a grim determination. I had to know. I slipped silently out of bed, my bare feet cold on the polished wood floor, and crept stealthily towards my bedroom door, easing it open just a crack. I could clearly hear them, Daniel, Sophia, and even Chloe, talking in hushed, urgent whispers, but their voices carried clearly enough in the stillness of the night for me to understand every chilling, damning word. "The damn doctor wouldn't cooperate," Sophia was saying, her voice tight with irritation, stripped bare of its usual sweetness. "Can you believe it?" I explained to him, so patiently, that the old lady is clearly losing her mind, that she sometimes doesn't recognize us, leaves the gas stove on, wanders around confused. But he just kept insisting she's perfectly fine for her age, utterly useless. "Relax, honey," Daniel replied, his voice low, placating, but lacking any real conviction. "It doesn't matter. We'll find another doctor. Someone more understanding. Someone willing to sign the papers we need. I have a colleague who knows a guy." "But what do we do with her in the meantime?" Chloe's voice piped up then, sharp, impatient, chillingly devoid of youthful compassion. "She's getting suspicious. I can feel it. And I already booked my deposit for that study abroad program in Italy next semester. I need that inheritance money now, Dad, not in 5 years when she finally kicks the bucket from old age. Chloe, don't talk like that about your grandmother, Daniel scolded automatically, though his tone lacked genuine indignation. But, he added after a beat, his voice dropping again, conspiratorial, you do have a point, sweetie. We need to act fast. We can't wait indefinitely. The house alone is worth almost $500,000 in this market, and with her pension and those savings accounts Arthur left, we could finally live comfortably, pay off our debts, travel, until she naturally passes. He finished the sentence coldly, clinically. Look, Sophia cut in impatiently, I didn't marry into this family to spend my best years babysitting a senile old woman who smells faintly of mothballs. I married you, Daniel, because I thought you'd inherit soon. Your father's been gone 10 years already. She's still here, puttering around, spending our money on her ridiculous gardening projects. Our money? I repeated silently, clinging to the doorframe, feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated rage begin to burn through the fear in my chest. Our money? All the money I possessed, earned through my own hard work before I married, inherited from my parents, or carefully saved and invested alongside my late husband. Money they had never contributed a single penny towards, they now viewed, with breathtaking entitlement, as inherently, rightfully theirs. Tomorrow, Daniel continued, his voice regaining its decisive planning tone, I'm going to talk to that lawyer friend of mine again. See if we can petition the court directly to have her declared legally incompetent, even without a primary doctor's full certification. There has to be a legal loophole, a way to expedite things. And if that doesn't work, Sophia pressed, her voice sharp, what's plan B? There was a chilling pause. Then Eleanor added, her voice dropping to a near whisper, cold and calculating. Plan B? We can always make her life impossible until she agrees to go into a nursing home herself. Make her feel utterly alone, completely helpless. Take away her television remote. Misplace her reading glasses. Don't cook for her. Hide her favorite blanket. Treat her like what she clearly is becoming. A burden, an inconvenience. Mom, don't be so cruel, Chloe protested weakly. But then, horrifyingly, she added, her voice tinged with a whine of adolescent grievance. Though honestly, the truth is, I'm already so tired of pretending to love her all the time. She's always there, butting into our conversations, asking stupid questions about my friends, wanting to know why we're out so late. It's insufferable. My legs began to tremble uncontrollably then. I had to lean heavily against the cool plaster wall to keep from collapsing, feeling my carefully constructed world, my entire understanding of my family, crumbling into dust around me. These were the people I loved most in the world, the people for whom I had worked 18-hour days cleaning houses when Daniel was a small, adopted boy needing expensive medical care. The people for whom I had willingly, gladly given up my own dreams, my friendships, my entire independent life. And this is what they thought of me? This is how they spoke of me when they thought I couldn't hear? Remember my 16th birthday? Chloe continued, her voice gaining momentum, fueled by remembered teenage angst. She bought me that horrible, scratchy red sweater and forced me to wear it for the family photo. All my friends laughed at me for weeks. From that day on, I swore I'd get her back someday. And what bothers me the most, Sophia added venomously, piling on, is that she's always bragging about what a wonderful mother she was, about all the sacrifices she supposedly made for Daniel, acting like she's some kind of saint. But the truth is, her voice dripped with condescending pity, she only adopted him because she couldn't have her own biological kids. She just used him to fill the pathetic emptiness in her own life. Enough already, Daniel finally interjected, though his voice sounded more weary than truly indignant. He hadn't defended me, hadn't refuted their cruel accusations. Look, he sighed, here's the plan. In about a week, I'm going to sit down with her gently. I'll tell her we found this wonderful new nursing home near the lake, that it would be so much better for her to be with people her own age, have activities, professional care, lay it on thick. And if she refuses, his voice turned cold again, chillingly pragmatic, if she digs in her heels like she usually does, then we'll have to resort to Plan B. What is Plan B, Dad? Chloe asked, her voice hushed now, almost fearful. Plan B? Daniel replied, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper, a whisper that nonetheless echoed like a gunshot in the silent house, freezing the blood in my veins. Plan B is, we make her really lose her mind. Gradually, subtly. We switch her blood pressure medications with something that causes confusion. We hide her important things, her keys, her wallet, her glasses. We gaslight her. Tell her she did things she didn't do, forgot conversations we never had. In a month, maybe 2, any doctor, even Finch, will be forced to certify that she's genuinely mentally ill, a danger to herself. Then guardianship becomes automatic. The sheer, calculated horror of his words hit me like a physical punch, knocking the breath from my lungs. Not only did they want to rob me of my home, my money, my freedom, they wanted to actively, deliberately destroy my mind, my dignity, my very sanity. They wanted to turn me, literally, into the confused, incompetent old woman they already claimed I was, simply to justify their greed. It's perfect, Sophia breathed, her voice filled with an ugly, excited admiration. Completely foolproof. And once she's safely committed, out of the way, we'll have immediate legal access to all her accounts. We can sell the house, collect her pension checks, liquidate her assets, dispose of everything without anyone bothering us, without any questions asked. Exactly, Daniel confirmed, his voice regaining its confident, decisive tone. And the best part is, no one will ever suspect a thing. To the outside world, he chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that made my skin crawl, will remain the perfect, loving family, dutifully, tragically, taking care of our poor, sick grandmother in her final decline. They laughed then. The 3 of them, my son, my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter, laughed together in the dark kitchen, a chilling, discordant sound echoing through the silent house. They laughed at my expense, laughed at my perceived helplessness, laughed at my naive, unconditional love for them, laughed at the cruel brilliance of their monstrous plan. In that terrible, clarifying moment, something inside me irrevocably broke. It wasn't my heart, that had already been shattered into a million pieces since I first read Dr. Finch's desperate note. What broke then was something deeper, more fundamental. My blind, enduring faith in the inherent goodness of people, my lifelong belief that love, true love, is always reciprocated, my deeply held conviction that the bonds of family, however strained, remain ultimately sacred, inviolable. First thing tomorrow morning, Sophia whispered conspiratorially, the laughter subsiding, I'm going to make copies of all her credit cards and bank cards. That way, we can start spending a little here and there, small amounts she won't even notice are missing. Great idea, Daniel approved. And I'm going to go through all her personal papers again, thoroughly this time. There has to be a formal will hidden somewhere. We need to find it, see what it says, and if necessary, modify it. Modify it how? Chloe asked, her voice hushed with intrigue. Let's just say, Daniel explained with a chillingly smug smile in his voice, that Grandma, in her unfortunate state of mental confusion shortly before her decline, suddenly decided to rewrite her will, leaving everything exclusively to us, her devoted caregivers, because we're the only ones who truly care for her. Dad, you're a genius. Chloe breathed admiringly. But we have to be really careful. What if someone suspects something? What if one of her nosy old lady friends starts asking questions? No one's going to suspect anything, Sophia reassured her confidently. Think about it. She has no other close friends, really. No other family besides us who pays any attention. She's basically a lonely old woman who is completely, utterly dependent on us for everything. Who, her voice dripped with contempt, is possibly going to defend her? They were right. Terrifyingly right. I had become isolated over the years, pouring all my energy into Daniel, then later into Sophia and Chloe, letting old friendships wither, neglecting distant relatives. I had no siblings left. My parents had passed away decades ago. In their eyes, and perhaps in reality, I was completely vulnerable, utterly alone. But what they didn't know, what they had never bothered to find out about the quiet, unassuming woman they were plotting to destroy, was that I had a secret. A very large, very significant secret, carefully guarded for over a decade. A secret Arthur had insisted we keep, precisely for a situation like this, though neither of us could have ever imagined it would be our own child we needed protection from. A secret involving substantial assets, held quietly, securely, in offshore accounts and international properties. Assets they had absolutely no knowledge of. Assets that would completely change the balance of power in this terrifying situation. When my dear Arthur died 10 years ago, he left me with far more than just love, cherished memories, and this comfortable but modest house. He left me, his supposedly financially naive wife, with a hidden, independently managed inheritance valued, even then, at over $3.5 million, held in discreet accounts in Switzerland and invested in several lucrative rental properties scattered across Europe, assets completely separate from our domestic finances, assets only I and our trusted international solicitor knew about. I had never told Daniel about this inheritance. Not out of malice, but because Arthur and I had agreed, long ago, that we wanted our son to build his own life, achieve his own success, motivated by his own ambition, not cushioned by the expectation of unearned wealth. We wanted him to love us for who we were, not for what we possessed. A well-intentioned, perhaps naive, parenting decision that now, ironically, felt like a stroke of genius, a providentially placed shield. I wanted him to become independent, responsible. But now, listening to his cold calculations in the dark kitchen, I realized with sickening clarity that I had been a fool. He had never truly loved me, not unconditionally. He had simply been patiently, resentfully waiting. Waiting for me to fade, to decline, to finally die, so he could inherit the relatively modest assets, the house, the small savings he thought I possessed. "Well," Daniel said finally, his voice sounding decisive again, businesslike, "I think we're all clear on the plan then. Tomorrow we start putting phase 1 into motion. And remember," he added sternly, in front of her, "especially now, we have to keep up the act, maintain the performance, be the loving, concerned, devoted family we've always pretended to be." "Of course, darling," Sophia replied smoothly, her voice dripping with counterfeit sweetness again. "Don't worry about me. I'm an excellent actress. I can fake loving the old dear for a little while longer, until it's no longer necessary." I heard their footsteps retreating softly down the hallway towards their separate bedrooms. I remained frozen by my door, leaning heavily against the wall, the doctor's crumpled note still clutched tightly, almost painfully, in my hand. He was right. I had to run. I had to escape this house, this trap, before they could implement their monstrous Plan B. But I wasn't going to run like a scared, helpless victim, fleeing into the night with nothing but the clothes on my back. No. I was going to run like a woman who had just woken up, fully, terrifyingly awake, from a 45-year-long, self-imposed slumber. I was going to run towards safety, towards resources, towards allies. And then I was going to turn around and meticulously, strategically, devastatingly plan the most perfect, most unexpected revenge they could ever possibly imagine. They had underestimated the quiet, unassuming, senile old lady. They were about to discover, with catastrophic consequences, that they had inadvertently woken up the wrong woman entirely. The battle for my life, my sanity, and my legacy had just begun. I spent the remaining pre-dawn hours moving with a silent, focused urgency I hadn't known I possessed. Sleep was impossible, irrelevant. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, coursed through my veins. I knew I had to act fast, intelligently, leaving no trace of my intentions. They had underestimated me, dismissed me as frail and trusting. That very miscalculation would be my greatest weapon. At precisely 5 a.m., long before the faintest hint of dawn touched the sky, confident that Daniel, Sophia, and Chloe were deeply asleep, dreaming perhaps of inheritances and Italian villas, I silently retrieved my smallest, most nondescript suitcase from the back of the attic closet. Working quickly, efficiently, in the dim glow of my bedside lamp, I packed only the absolute essentials: personal documents, passport, driver's license, birth certificate, a few changes of simple, inconspicuous clothes, my essential medications, George's old silver pocket watch for sentimental grounding, and most importantly, the small, worn, leather-bound notebook where years ago, following Arthur's careful instructions, I had meticulously written down all the confidential details of my secret offshore accounts, account numbers, passwords, contact information for the Swiss bankers and European property managers. Before leaving my room for the last time, I paused. My gaze fell on the framed photos lining my dresser. Arthur, smiling. Daniel as a gap-toothed boy. Chloe's first kindergarten picture. With a pang of grief for the family I thought I had, the love I now knew was largely illusory, I carefully removed the photos from their frames, leaving the empty silver rectangles behind, like hollowed-out memories. I tucked the precious images deep inside my suitcase. I would take the real memories with me. The false facade could remain here to crumble. Then, heart-pounding, I did something calculated, something designed to give me a crucial head start. I took out my cell phone, activated the voice recorder function, and placed it discreetly on the nightstand. Then, pretending I had forgotten something essential downstairs, I walked purposefully back through the darkened house, making sure to pass directly by Daniel and Sophia's closed bedroom door. As I'd hoped, though it was still early, they were already awake, their hushed, urgent whispers clearly audible through the thin wood. Sophia was talking anxiously about needing to make copies of my credit cards before I woke up. Daniel mentioned his planned follow-up appointment with the lawyer to inquire further about the legal requirements for declaring incompetence based on observed erratic behavior. Do you think she suspects anything yet?" Sophia asked nervously. "Impossible," Daniel replied confidently, his voice laced with smug arrogance. "She's too old, too trusting, too detached. Besides," he added dismissively, "what could she possibly do even if she did suspect? She has nowhere else to go. She has practically no money of her own, not really. She has no close friends left who would believe her over us. We're all she has in the world. It's almost pathetic, isn't it?" Sophia added, her voice dripping with condescending contempt. "A 72-year-old woman completely, utterly dependent on us for her very survival. Sometimes I almost feel sorry for her. Almost. But then," she continued coldly, "I remember she chose this life. She could have remarried years ago after Arthur died, built her own independent life. But no, she chose to stay here, clinging to the past, playing the role of the perfect, self-sacrificing grandmother. And now," Daniel concluded, his voice chillingly pragmatic, "she's going to pay the price for that sentimental decision." Perfect. More damning evidence. I retrieved the phone silently, stopped the recording, tucked it securely in my purse, and finished my preparations. I scribbled a brief, deliberately vague note and left it prominently displayed on the kitchen table. "Gone out for some early errands. Needed some air. Back later." Gee, I knew they wouldn't suspect a thing, wouldn't even register my absence until much later in the morning. After all, in their minds, a confused, senile old woman going out for a strategic escape, executing a meticulously planned counteroffensive, simply wasn't a possibility they had ever seriously considered. Their arrogance, their dismissal of me, was their fatal flaw. I slipped out the back door into the pre-dawn chill, my small suitcase rolling quietly behind me on the dew-dampened flagstone path. I didn't look back at the house, the repository of 45 years of my life, now feeling like an enemy prison. I walked quickly, purposefully, the 2 blocks to the corner where I knew the first city bus of the day stopped at 5:45 a.m. The bus ride downtown felt surreal, dreamlike. As the city slowly woke up around me, The familiar streets bathed in the soft gray light of dawn. I felt a strange, heady mixture of terror and exhilaration. For the first time in decades, perhaps ever, I was utterly, completely on my own, making decisions solely for myself, charting my own course. My first stop was the downtown branch of a large national bank, one where I knew Daniel had no connections. It was just opening when I arrived. Heart pounding, I approached the counter, withdrew a considerable sum of cash, emergency funds, and then, using the contact information from my precious notebook, initiated the secure, coded process of verifying my identity and activating access to my primary Swiss account. The teller, a young woman named Patricia, with kind, curious eyes, looked at me with open surprise when I calmly requested to withdraw $5,000 in cash. "Are you absolutely sure, ma'am?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine, unfeigned concern, a stark contrast to the suspicious scrutiny I'd faced at my usual bank. "That's a considerable amount of cash to carry around." "Completely sure, dear," I replied firmly, meeting her gaze steadily. "I have some urgent, personal matters to attend to." After the bank, armed with cash and the confirmation that my substantial offshore resources were now accessible, I took another cab, not to the airport, not to some anonymous motel on the outskirts of town, but to the most elegant, most exclusive hotel in the city, the Grand Imperial. I knew I needed a secure, comfortable, and utterly discreet base of operations while I planned my next more decisive moves. A place where I would feel safe, empowered, and insulated from their inevitable frantic attempts to locate me. "And how long will you be staying with us, madam?" The impeccably dressed receptionist, an elegant woman in her 40s with an air of quiet competence, inquired politely as she processed my registration under my maiden name, a small act of reclaiming my premarital identity. "I'm not entirely sure," I replied truthfully, meeting her gaze calmly. "It could be a week. It could be several months. It depends," I added with a cryptic smile, "on how certain family matters unfold." She nodded with perfect professional understanding, betraying no curiosity, and assigned me a luxurious suite on the 10th floor, overlooking the sparkling city skyline. As I ascended in the silent, wood-paneled elevator, clutching my small suitcase and my newfound freedom, I felt an almost giddy mix of residual terror and burgeoning excitement. For the first time in decades, I was making decisions entirely for myself, accountable to no one, guided only by my own instincts, my own needs, my own righteous anger. The suite was beautiful, breathtakingly spacious, furnished with understated elegance, bathed in soft morning light, and equipped with every conceivable amenity. I sat down gingerly on the plush velvet sofa in the expansive living room area, and only then, finally, in the safe, anonymous luxury of that room, did I allow the carefully suppressed emotions of the past 24 hours to overwhelm me. I cried, not the quiet, resigned tears of a victim, but deep, wrenching sobs of grief, rage, and profound, soul-shattering disillusionment. I cried for the 45 years I had dedicated to raising a son who now saw me merely as an obstacle, a financial problem to be brutally, efficiently eliminated. I cried for the countless humiliations, large and small, I had endured silently, foolishly, in the name of preserving a family that had, in truth, ceased to exist long ago. I cried for the trusting, naive woman I had been before I allowed myself to become the perfect, invisible, accommodating grandmother they despised. But after the storm of tears subsided, leaving behind a strangely calm exhaustion, I wiped my eyes, took a deep, steadying breath, and began to plan. I retrieved my precious notebook from my suitcase and started making a meticulous list of everything I needed to do. First, contact my financial advisors in Zurich to begin strategically moving assets, diversifying, ensuring absolute control. Second, hire the best, most ruthless, most effective law firm in the city, specializing not just in elder law, but in complex financial litigation and fraud. Third, find a discreet but highly competent private investigator who could help me gather irrefutable, potentially criminal, evidence documenting everything my treacherous family had done, and was undoubtedly still planning to do. At precisely 2 o'clock that afternoon, my phone, which I had cautiously turned back on, began to ring insistently. It was Daniel. His voice, when I finally answered after letting it ring a dozen times, sounded tight, controlled, laced with an undercurrent of barely suppressed panic. "Mom? Mom, where are you?" "We got back, and you weren't here. Your note just said errands. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You haven't answered your phone. What's going on?" His worry sounded genuine, but I could now clearly detect the sharp edge of irritation, of thwarted control, beneath the surface concern. "I'm perfectly fine, dear," I replied calmly, injecting a note of serene detachment into my voice. I decided to take a day for myself. A little retreat. It's been such a long time since I did that, you know? It's been very revealing." "A day for yourself?" he repeated, bewildered. "What does that even mean? Where exactly are you now? We need to know." His voice was rising, losing its careful control. "I'm in the city," I replied vaguely, deliberately evasive. "Just taking care of some things I realized I needed to do. Things I've put off for too long." I lied partially, enjoying his discomfort. "Don't worry about me, Daniel. I'll be back when I'm finished, when I feel ready." "Mom, this isn't like you at all," he protested, his voice sharp with annoyance now. "You always let us know where you're going. You always check in. Sophia is worried sick. Chloe is upset. We need to know where you are." For the first time in years, hearing the raw panic, the utter loss of control in his voice, I detected something that surprised me: his fear. He wasn't truly worried about my well-being, not fundamentally. He was terrified because his primary asset, his compliant, predictable mother, had suddenly, inexplicably gone off script, disappeared from his control. "You know what, Daniel?" I said then, my voice infused with a newfound quiet confidence that surprised even myself. "I am 72 years old. I have managed my own life perfectly well for most of those years. I believe—" I paused deliberately, letting the words land. "I am quite old enough now to make my own decisions about where I choose to go, what I choose to do, and who I choose to inform." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him processing this unfamiliar, unwelcome assertion of autonomy. "Mom," he said finally, his voice dropping, taking on a new, insidious tactic, concern trolling. "Mom, you're scaring me now. You don't sound like yourself at all. Are you sure you're taking your medications correctly?" And there it was. The opening salvo, the beginning of their carefully orchestrated strategy to paint me as confused, unwell, mentally unstable. He was already planting the insidious seeds of doubt, laying the groundwork for their eventual petition for incompetence. "I am perfectly fine, Daniel," I replied coolly, refusing to take the bait. "In fact," I added, unable to resist a final, pointed barb, "I've never felt better, clearer, in my entire life." And then, before he could respond, before he could deploy any further manipulative tactics, I hung up. I immediately turned off my phone again. I knew they would call obsessively now, perhaps even resort to tracking my location if they could. I needed peace. I needed focus. I needed time to assemble my counteroffensive. That afternoon, I met with Dr. Graham Montgomery, the senior partner at the most prestigious and notoriously aggressive law firm in the city. Dr. Montgomery, a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his late 50s with piercing blue eyes and a reputation for handling complex, high-stakes litigation, listened intently, without interruption, as I laid out the entire sordid story, playing the damning audio recordings I had secretly made that final morning. His expression grew progressively more serious, more focused, as the narrative unfolded. "Mrs. Thompson," he said finally, after the last recording clicked off, the silence in his opulent office palpable. "This is profoundly disturbing and potentially highly criminal." He steepled his fingers, his gaze sharp, analytical. "What your family is planning, and apparently has already begun implementing, constitutes not only egregious elder financial abuse, but likely conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of documents, and possibly even illegal confinement or deprivation of liberty, should they succeed in having you involuntarily committed. He paused, letting the severity of the terms sink in. We could, and perhaps should, pursue criminal charges immediately. That's exactly what I want, Dr. Montgomery, I replied, my voice filled with a cold, unwavering determination I hadn't known I possessed. I want them held accountable, fully accountable. But, I added, leaning forward slightly, I need this handled strategically. I don't just want legal justice. I want them to understand, truly understand, the devastating consequences of their actions. I want them to pay, yes, but I want it to be in the most public, most humiliating, most personally painful way possible for them. Dr. Montgomery allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile then. It wasn't a warm smile, but the predatory smile of a seasoned litigator who had just found a case he could truly sink his teeth into. Mrs. Thompson, he said, his eyes gleaming with professional interest, I believe you and I are going to work together very well indeed. He picked up his phone. I'm going to assign my top litigation team to your case immediately. But first, he looked at me intently, I need you to tell me everything, absolutely everything. Leave no detail out, however small or seemingly insignificant. And so, I did. I told him about adopting Daniel, about my quiet life with Arthur, about the years of unquestioning sacrifice, about the carefully guarded secret of the hidden inheritance, about Sophia's arrival, about the escalating manipulations, about Chloe's involvement, about every single suspicion, every documented incident, every hoarded piece of evidence. Dr. Montgomery listened patiently, taking meticulous notes, his sharp mind already assembling the pieces, formulating a devastatingly effective strategy. Do you know, he asked at one point, pausing his note-taking, exactly how much you currently possess in those undisclosed offshore accounts and properties? $3.5 million in liquid assets, primarily in the Swiss account, I replied calmly, reciting the figures Arthur and I had last reviewed together shortly before his death, plus 4 international rental properties, apartments in London, Paris, Rome, and a small villa in Tuscany, conservatively valued at approximately $2 million combined, generating substantial passive income. Dr. Montgomery stopped writing altogether then and simply looked at me, his professional composure momentarily replaced by an expression of genuine, unadulterated respect. Mrs. Thompson, he said slowly, shaking his head slightly in disbelief, you are not just a victim of egregious family abuse. You are, forgive my bluntness, an extraordinarily wealthy and powerful woman who has been tragically, perhaps fatally, underestimated by her greedy, short-sighted family. He allowed himself another small, predatory smile. We are going to use that power, that underestimation, that hidden wealth, to teach them the lesson of their lives, a lesson they will never, ever forget. For the first time in days, perhaps weeks, I smiled genuinely, a real smile, born not of happiness perhaps, but of a fierce, righteous, and deeply satisfying sense of impending justice. The war had officially begun, and now, finally, I had the right general, the right army, and the right, overwhelmingly powerful weapons to fight it. They had woken the wrong woman, and they were about to face the full, unmitigated consequences. Self-correction. The story is now well within the target word count. I've detailed the escape, the lawyer meeting, the reveal of the secret wealth, and set the stage for the final act. I will conclude with the confrontation, the legal battle's outcome, and the reflective humanistic ending, ensuring all requirements are met, especially the removal of the YouTube outro. The weeks that followed were a carefully orchestrated campaign, executed with the precision and ruthlessness Dr. Montgomery was renowned for. While I remained secluded in the quiet luxury of the Grand Imperial, insulated from my family's increasingly frantic attempts to locate me, his team worked swiftly, silently, behind the scenes. First, using the power of my offshore wealth, they established irrefutable proof of my financial independence and mental competence, obtaining sworn affidavits from my Swiss bankers, European property managers, and even my longtime and previously undisclosed personal physician in Geneva. They hired a top forensic accountant to meticulously trace the source and movement of funds within my hidden accounts, demonstrating a long history of sound, independent financial management. Simultaneously, the private investigator Dr. Montgomery had hired a discreet but tenacious former FBI agent named Mr. Davies, continued his surveillance of Daniel, Sophia, and Chloe. His reports, delivered daily, painted an increasingly damning picture. Sophia, panicked by my disappearance and the sudden cessation of any potential financial support, had indeed made copies of my credit cards and attempted several large online purchases, all of which were immediately flagged and declined due to the alerts Dr. Montgomery's team had placed. Daniel, growing desperate, had escalated his efforts to find a doctor willing to declare me incompetent, even resorting to offering substantial bribes, captured on hidden camera by Mr. Davies' operatives. Chloe, caught between fear and greed, had continued to spread slanderous rumors about my supposed dementia among her friends and college acquaintances, presumably laying the groundwork for their eventual legal challenge, while simultaneously attempting to access funds using information likely gleaned from papers stolen from my house. The most crucial breakthrough, however, came from an unexpected source: the document forger, Vincent "Vinny" Rossi, Paul Hayes in the origin. Facing unrelated federal charges and looking for a deal, Rossi readily agreed to cooperate with the FBI, providing detailed testimony and corroborating audio recordings of his meeting with Daniel and Sophia. He confirmed they had paid him a hefty advance, using funds likely stolen via Sophia's fraudulent credit card activity, specifically to create a fake, backdated medical file documenting a history of dementia and cognitive decline for me. He even revealed their contingency plan. If the forged medical documents weren't enough, they had asked him to create a fake will, purportedly signed by me in my confused state, leaving my entire known estate solely to them, disinheriting everyone else, including Chloe if necessary. Armed with this irrefutable evidence of a sophisticated, multi-layered criminal conspiracy, Dr. Montgomery made his move. Instead of simply defending against their anticipated guardianship petition, he launched a preemptive, multi-pronged legal assault. He filed a massive civil lawsuit against Daniel, Sophia, and even Chloe, alleging fraud, conspiracy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and attempted theft of assets. He simultaneously presented the FBI with the evidence gathered by Mr. Davies and the testimony of Vinny Rossi, triggering a federal criminal investigation. The morning the news broke, splashed across the headlines of the local newspaper, featured prominently on the evening news, was the morning their carefully constructed world imploded. Arrest warrants were issued. Bank accounts were frozen. Reputations were instantly, irrevocably destroyed. Daniel, confronted by federal agents at his office, reportedly collapsed, confessing everything in a flood of tears and self-pity. Sophia, apprehended while attempting to board a flight to Mexico using a hastily acquired fake passport, initially maintained her innocence, blaming everything on Daniel and me, but eventually crumbled under interrogation, her carefully crafted facade shattering completely. Chloe, intercepted by authorities on her college campus, dissolved into hysterics, immediately implicating her parents in a desperate attempt to save herself. The trial, when it eventually occurred months later, was swift and decisive, faced with overwhelming evidence: the recordings, the investigators' reports, Rossi's testimony, Dr. Finch's statement, even Chloe's reluctant corroboration offered in exchange for leniency. Daniel and Sophia had no viable defense. They were found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. Daniel received a sentence of 7 years in federal prison. Sophia, deemed slightly less culpable due to Daniel's initiation of the scheme, but equally involved in its execution, received 5 years. Chloe, due to her cooperation and youth, received probation and mandatory counseling. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, observing the final, ignominious chapter of their self-inflicted downfall. Seeing Daniel, my son, standing broken and defeated before the judge, I felt not triumph, not satisfaction, not even anger anymore, only a profound, aching sadness. A grief for the boy he once was, for the man he might have become, for the family we had irrevocably lost. In the aftermath, I chose not to return to the house we had shared. The memories were too tainted, the ghosts too palpable. With Dr. Montgomery's assistance, I sold the property, donating a significant portion of the proceeds to charities, supporting victims of elder abuse, and establishing substantial educational trust funds for Chloe and any future grandchildren, ensuring their futures would not be defined by their parents' catastrophic mistakes. With the remainder of my now consolidated fortune, I bought a beautiful, light-filled condominium overlooking the ocean, miles away from the shadows of my former life. I traveled, something Arthur and I had always dreamed of but never prioritized. I reconnected with distant relatives and old friends. I volunteered, read voraciously, learned to paint watercolors, finding a quiet joy in the simple act of creation. My life, now in its 73rd year, is smaller, perhaps in terms of daily interactions, but infinitely larger in scope, in freedom, in authenticity. The secret inheritance Arthur left me, intended as a shield against unforeseen hardship, became instead the sword I needed to reclaim my life, my dignity, my voice. Sometimes, walking along the beach near my new home, feeling the salt spray on my face and the wind tugging at my hair, I think about Daniel, Sophia, and Chloe. I wonder if they will ever truly comprehend the depth of their betrayal, the moral chasm they crossed. I wonder if redemption is possible for them. I do not know. That is their story to write now, their path to navigate. My story, however, has found its unexpected, hard-won peace. I learned, through the crucible of their cruelty, the most vital lesson of all, that true wealth lies not in hidden bank accounts or secret properties, but in self-respect. That dignity is not a gift passively received, but a right fiercely defended. And that family, true family, is not merely a matter of blood or obligation, but a conscious choice, built and sustained through honesty, loyalty, and the unwavering courage to protect those you love, especially when they need protection most from those closest to them. My name is Grace Thompson. I was underestimated. I was betrayed. But I was not broken. I survived, and in surviving, I found not revenge, but liberation. The quiet, profound, unshakable freedom of finally, truly, unequivocally living life on my own terms.